Hey everyone. So I'm a father of 15 and 12-year-old girls, and one of the things I always said growing up is, I'm never going to say the things that my parents said to me, right? Or I'm never going to do this or do that, or because they were annoying as a kid. And so I'm driving down the road the other day with my 15-year-old, and she's on her phone checking text message, Snapchatting, doing all this other stuff, and she can't get a hold of somebody. And I said these 5 words that I said I'd never say, which was, when I was your age, and then you can fill in the blank, right? In this case, it was, our phones were attached to a wall. Or, we thought it was cool when we got the cordless phone where you could actually walk away and we didn't have a 50-foot cord stuck to it. And it got me to think a little bit about, over the course of, say the last 100 years, a lot of things have changed. The information that we have available now, technology and the advances that we've seen there, television's changed, entertainment industry's changed, obviously having cell phones, the internet, the advent of the internet. In 1996 there was only about 250,000 websites worldwide. Here we are 20 years later, and there's over 1 billion. And so, one of the things I want to talk about is a big problem in our society today. And it hasn't changed over the course of time, other than, in my opinion, it's actually gotten worse. And so, we always talk about these different things, and if you 1950s, 1960s, there were people that were saying, the world's going to hell in a handbasket, or things have never been this bad. And it's all relative, right? In the 50s and 60s, it was kind of rock and roll music was one of the items. Before that, during Prohibition, it was alcohol, and there's at any given time during period during time, you can find something like that. But one of the issues that I think has actually gotten worse with the advent of our information and technology is the issue of pornography. I remember when I was a kid growing up in the early 70s, you had to find it, right? You had to actually go look for it. It was either, a magazine stuck somewhere, somebody brought one to school, it was maybe in your dad's closet or attic or something. There wasn't a lot of movies or things like that. You certainly couldn't go rent movies or those kinds of things. So it was not readily available. Today, it's a click away. It's going doing a research project and going and typing in whitehouse.com and not getting what you think you're going to get, right? Because .com is actually a pornography site, and so I think the access to having all of that information and having that is a lot different today. Now, what hasn't changed is how kids process it, and so today I want to talk specifically about children. And their access to this type of information and what it does to them on a scientific level. And we'll talk more on a spiritual level later in another post. And so what I mean by that is, 20, 50 years ago, kids would be impacted by pornography. Or get addicted to pornography through other means. And what I mean by that is generally addiction, and I'm certainly not a doctor here, but generally addiction starts through some type of traumatic event. That might mean living with an alcoholic parent. It might mean living with somebody who's abusive verbally or physically, maybe non-existent or absentee parents. It could be something that happened at school. There's many trauma comes in many different forms, and it could come through sexual abuse at an early age. And so what's different about it now, I think, is that it took a lot of those kinds of traumas early on for that to push kids into any type of addictive behavior, whether that be drugs or alcohol or pornography. Those kinds of things. And from a scientific standpoint, it's important to know what that kind of thing does to the human brain, specifically to the brain of a child. So someone in 8 to 10-year-old range, but actually any of those underdeveloped brains. Because if you go back to 1920 or you come to 2016, the brain of an 8-year-old child in terms of development and what they're able to to really deal with, and what they're able to decipher and understand is really the same. So just because they're getting inundated with all this new information and new technology, and yes, an 8-year-old child can probably work an iPhone better than a 40-year-old person, doesn't necessarily mean that they've got the maturity level to be able to comprehend and deal with those types of trauma. And so fast forward to today, right? And whenever you, in the 60s and the 70s, if there was something that happened that was a traumatic event, generally trauma is involved when something happens that's not comprehensible, right? And so in the terms of, say sexual abuse, for example, a child is doing something or being coerced or forced into doing something that they know is wrong. Yet, scientifically, sex is a pleasurable or gratifying experience, and that was created that way by God for a reason. And so imagine the mind of an 8-year-old boy or girl who's going through that and clearly knows that something is wrong, that this person shouldn't be doing this with them or shouldn't be coercing them into this. Yet they also get some gratitude from that. That's really confusing for them and really puts them in a place where they really don't know what to do. And so, but because they know they're being taken advantage of in a certain way, that also makes them feel less than. It makes them feel like they're not worthy. And if they're not worthy, then they've got to go to a place that makes them feel good. And what they've learned that makes them feel good might be, in this case, some type of pornography or alcohol or drugs, and takes them away from kind of the day-to-day strain that they're feeling because of that. Now, fast forward to today, it's a little different. Those things still happen, and those things are certainly still relevant today. But I actually firmly believe that with the advent of our technology and the increase in our ability to get information, that we actually are raising a generation of kids who are going through trauma on a daily basis. So imagine, if you will, if you're an 8-year-old boy and you have an iPhone or an iPod or an iPad or whatever, right? Just a computer. Everybody, for the most part, has computers in their house and are accessible. And as you're looking through YouTube for just videos, say you type in a Katy Perry video, or you want to watch Katy Perry, who a lot of the kids like, obviously. She has a song that says, "I Kissed a Girl and I Liked It." If you pull that video up, you're likely going to get recommendations to the right of that that have nothing to do with songs, right? They're going to have a lot to do with girls kissing other girls, right? And that leads to more and more. And it's really so easy for a naive child to get to that, understand that they know that they're doing something wrong, but also be stimulated by that. And that's a very difficult place to be. That's trauma. It may not be as abusive as someone that's coercing them or forcing them into something, or it may not be physical or verbal, but it's still trauma. It's still something that they can't comprehend and their mind can't really deal with. And if left unchecked, that trauma can turn into years and years of self-medicating, right? Going to a place where you make yourself feel better, even for a small period of time, and then just repeating that behavior over and over. That's really all addiction is. And so, some statistics to kind of think about, as for all, hopefully the parents that are watching here, the average age of exposure to internet pornography today is 11 years old. So if you have a child that is 11 years old or older, there's a very high likelihood they've already been exposed to it. The question is, how they get exposed to it, and were they able to ask questions about it? Did they really understand it? Were they able to talk about their feelings and how it made them feel? Those are important things, right? Otherwise, they're trying to comprehend and process things that they really can't understand. No matter how mature your 11-year-old is, or 9 or 10 or whatever, there's only so much maturity that can go into a brain of a 9, 10, or 11-year-old. And it's the same situation, right? You wouldn't let your 11-year-old go to a high school party where there's going to be drinking, right? Because you don't trust them to make the right decisions. You don't trust that they can comprehend that because they don't have that maturity. Same thing applies here. And so, if you look at the advent of technology, right, the internet today, as I mentioned earlier, in 1996 we had 250,000 websites worldwide. Today we have over 1 billion. 4.2 million of those are pornographic in nature. The porn industry today actually makes more money than the entertainment industry. And when I say entertainment, I mean movies and television. Pornography, just in the last year, made more money than ABC, CBS, NBC combined. So it's a huge problem. It's a huge problem not just for our kids, but for everyone. And as I mentioned in another post, we'll talk about adults and how we deal with that. So what do you do about it? Well, I don't have all the answers. I don't pretend to. But I do have some things that I think are important to remember. First thing is, what are you teaching your kids on a regular basis, right? Are you teaching them the principles of the Bible? Are you talking to them about God? Are you talking to them about sexual immorality and what the Bible says about sexual immorality? It addresses it a lot in the Bible. There are many passages in scriptures that talk about it. The second thing is snoop. Don't be afraid to snoop. And don't be afraid to let your kids know that you're snooping. There are applications, there are software that allow you to see what your kids are texting, what they're deleting, text that they're deleting, their Facebook posts, Instagram posts, those kinds of things. We use them, and I'm okay with my kids knowing that we use them, because we're not trying to catch them doing something wrong. We're trying to protect them. And so it's important to have a conversation with them, to have them understand that these things are real, right? They're out there. There's lots of examples of kids who didn't think that those things could happen to them, and they always, and they do. So I think it's important to have those conversations with them. Get them involved in a community that supports that same type of behavior. That's a church community. That's understanding who they're hanging out with, knowing the parents of the people that they hang out with. The reality of this is, no matter what you do, right, with the technology and the information that comes into our homes today, it's impossible to keep it from them. It's going to happen. It's going to happen at school. It's going to happen in first grade in some cases. They're going to have friends who talk about those things, because not everybody has the same values as you may. And so the only real way to protect against that is to make sure they have the knowledge beforehand. Make sure that they will come to you, have a conversation with you to say, I saw this today, or I heard this today, or somebody talked to me about this today, and I felt really uncomfortable about it. And you have to be open to having that conversation, and it's a hard one, right? Because it's heartbreaking to know that your child is being exposed to that at such a young age, and there's nothing you can do about it. But there is something you can do about it. You can prep them for it. The one thing that is all relative is, yes, we do live in a different world. Yeah, the information that we have today, the fast-paced world that we have today, puts us in a different situation. But the biblical truths hold true. And so, teaching your kids that at an early age, and really any time, having them involved in community that is biblically based and church based and centered on God's Word, are important things. Those are protection. Those are just like putting up walls, physical walls in some cases. The more that your child can be involved in those things, the more that your child can open their hearts and their minds to those things, the more that they can truly understand and have that relationship, the bigger the barrier, right? The better the lines of communication are open, the better off you're going to be. So, I think it's something to think about. Do your research. Understand what's going on in the world. The information, while can be extremely valuable and can provide a lot of good things for us, is also very, very dangerous. And if it's not used in the right way and not kept in check by those who have guardianship or authority or parental rights or whatever over children, it's going to just get worse and worse. And I'm convinced that we're raising almost a generation of addicts to pornography and sex. There was a study that was done, I read about just about a week ago, of teenage boys and girls, and the study was essentially for those that had been actively watching pornography, and it asked a lot of questions about love and intimacy and what they thought girls liked. The boys asked about what they thought girls liked, etc. And inevitably, the boys' answers were around the girls like it, like they like to be treated roughly, they like to be humiliated. Questions around intimacy always involved around the act of sex as opposed to actual intimacy. And this is what they're learning. And if nobody's teaching them something different, this is what they think is acceptable and what the girls like. ask the same questions of the girls, and of course their answers were always different, right? Their intimacy involves being heard, cuddling, involves more feeling and less about the act. But they perform the act because they think the guys want that. And then they try to live up to the standards of these images on the screens, which aren't real. The situations aren't real. And they have to live up to this because that's how they get their attention, right? And so now, not only have we created a situation where the boys are clearly don't know what intimacy is, they clearly don't know what spiritual leadership is, and to be able to lead a family. We've also had women now with low self-esteem because now they feel like they have to be something that they're not, and able to conform, to enable themselves to conform with what the boys want. It's a vicious cycle, and it's getting worse. And so I guess my challenge to everyone is, for those with kids, talk to your kids, understand where they are in their relationship with God. Put them in situations and ask them questions that are situational to say, what would you do in this situation? See what they come up with. Right? If they can't think about it on the spot, they probably wouldn't do it on the spot. Snoop. Understand what's going on in their lives. It's okay to snoop. They're children, and if your 13-year-old or 14-year-old, or in my case 15 and 12, get mad at me for snooping, sorry for your luck. Until you're out of the house and mature in such a way that you can support yourself and you can start a family on your own and you're teaching others, then it's my job to make sure I protect and teach you. And you got to really take that approach. And you can do that in a loving way. It doesn't have to be a condescending way, and it doesn't have to be a mean way. So it can be done in a loving way. But they have to know that they subjugate themselves to you as a parent. Right? The Bible also says that as well, right? Honor your mother and father. So there's all those kinds of things. And then the last thing is get them involved in community. If you're not going to church, go to church. Figure it out. I'm making this with the assumption that those who are watching this are Christians or believe in God. Start practicing that. That community is the most important weapon we have against what really is the devil's tools. And pornography, I think, is the number one devil tool, especially for men. And he's winning. It's getting worse, and we're really not doing anything about it. All we're doing is really just changing the norm, so that the norm now looks something like what 20 years ago what people would be up in arms about. So challenge yourself, talk to your kids. I'd love to hear feedback. So anything you got, please let me know. I enjoy doing these things. I'm gonna try to do them a lot more, and I appreciate the time. And take care, and God bless.